Stop me if you've heard this one before, but as the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. So high quality data will come from a high quality, properly installed device in your vehicles. Really, it depends on the telematics provider as well to clean that data and transform it into those usable, actionable insights. AI is not meant to replace the fleet manager or dispatcher. It is really supposed to make them more effective and give them more time back to be strategic. The power of AI is that it automates a lot of that manual work of analysis, of digging through hundreds of reports, spending hours crunching numbers. That all will be done within the span of minutes with the power of AI. The AI can really answer the what and the when, so giving the human in the loop the ability to focus on the why. On the reduced accident sides, for us, aggressive driving we've seen is a very large indicator of potential accidents. Harsh braking, acceleration, cornering, tailgating, those kinds of behaviors. Fleets that typically use these AI-powered insights, be it benchmarking or cameras or combinations of all of these, to coach these behaviors will typically see the quickest improvement in their safety.
Welcome back to Trucker Tech. Today, we're going to take a deep dive into the impact of AI in transportation. I know all of you hear about AI each and every day and how it's going to impact your business. But today, we're going to look at the impact of Geotab in AI. I'm pleased to be joined by a Geotabber, Narayanan. Good morning, Abby.
Good morning, John. Thanks for having me.
Well, why don't you share? I know you've been at Geotab for several years now. Why don't you give the audience a little background of your role at Geotab and a little highlight of the Geotab organization?
Sure. So my role at Geotab is a senior data intelligence advocate. And really what that means is to advocate for what we're doing internally and externally with all of the great stuff we're doing with data, with AI, with technology, but also make it approachable for anyone who's listening, whether that's a current Geotab customer, future Geotab customers, anyone who's in the world of telematics. Really, this is meant to be a informational but also inspirational session, hopefully. Some notes about me: I'm a technical guy by trade. I cut my teeth on computer science and data analytics. Got experience from a whole bunch of different industries in retail, in loyalty, consulting, and now I'm in the telematics world. Outside of that, though, I love to talk to people, love to tell stories. And outside of my day job, I'm a dog dad to Ellie the Corgi, and I am a Toronto sports fan. Go Blue Jays.
Hey, yeah, we were just talking a minute as we record this. It is game one tonight, Toronto Blue Jays versus the Los Angeles Dodgers. So what's your prediction of the outcome? How many games? And I know you're going to predict that Toronto wins the World Series.
Oh man, if you know what, if I had it my way, Toronto takes it in 4 and LA doesn't know what hit them.
Yeah,
But
that'd be ideal.
if I'm being honest, Shohei Ohtani, man, that guy is something special. It's quite the matchup to see, Canada's baseball team go up against what looks to be one of, if not the greatest players to ever play the game. So let's see. I'm expecting this to go probably 6, maybe 7, because what's a World Series if it doesn't go 7 games, right?
Yeah, it should be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to tuning in tonight myself, Abby. And hey, little disclaimer here at Add-on Systems, we are a Geotab partner. We do a lot of integration work and are a reseller. That's why I'm excited to have Abby on. And Abby, a little bit, I don't know if you mentioned over 5 million devices on the air across the globe and 2,500 Geotabbers. That's pretty strong as far as your commitment. And another thing I like about Geotab is you're an engineering-based company focused on the product and the impact that the platform can have on end users.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that engineering DNA really starts right at the top, right from our leader and CEO, Neil Cause, who's an engineer by trade, right? So we have engineering in our DNA. It started off as a little small family business out in Oakville, Canada back in 2000. And here we are 25 years later. Like you said, 5 million vehicles across the globe, 2,500 Geotabbers, but we still operate like one big family. And, everything around the Go device, the Curve algorithm, how we collect data, the suite of products that we have. It's a continually evolving tool platform, and also beyond fleet management. We're a data and technology company at our core. So everything from our Altitude product, which is aggregate transportation insights, to all of the strides we're making with AI, for example, Geotab Ace, which we'll get into a little bit more later.
Yeah, let's jump right in. Predictive analytics. That is a term we hear a lot, Abby. Moving beyond the buzzword, what specific data points from a truck is an AI model actually analyzing to predict, for example, a potential battery or alternator failure?
Great question. And for me, before we talk about the world of predictive, it's important to understand, where we're coming from in the reactive world. So let's take a check engine light, for example. Those are reactive. Those will come on when the failure's already happened, right? So most times when you see the check engine light, you take the car in because something's already broken down. The predictive side looks at those leading indicators for what could potentially happen based on the signals. One of my favorite examples is the electrical systems rating diagnostic that we've developed, where we're actually looking at the cranking voltage of any given vehicle compared to similar vehicles like it. So take your F-150, for example. We look at all other F-150s and similar types of pickups. This idea of benchmarking, which we'll touch on a little bit later, we looked at how a typical voltage curve looks across the different components of the electrical system at specific points, for example, at the ignition. And then we look at which vehicles don't follow these healthy trends. That really gives us a sense of, oh, this vehicle's electrical system might potentially have an issue. You should probably get that looked at. But for us in the predictive world, really delivering the insight that a failure is likely to happen is the power of the prediction. When we talk about predictive maintenance as well, for us at Geotab, it's always about having that clear North Star, right? So we wanted to spend as much time as we could to really understand the impacts of specific fault codes on downtime, this idea of what downtime means to fleets before we actually get it into predicting it, because we wanted to make sure that folks have trust in our understanding of downtime as well as in the data that predicts it.
Yeah,
So, for example,
downtown
yep.
can be very costly for any organization, whether you're running Class 8 tractors or a fleet of F-150s, like you mentioned, out doing oil field service work and checking meters.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it goes back to highlighting what these issues are that we have the most confidence in, right? So when we have a lot of data, that's a lot of noise. But the idea is that we're trying to find those right signals within the noise to highlight those specific issues. So a lot of our research into fault combinations that result in downtime, what are the most likely faults that would result in large amounts of downtime, and how can we help mitigate that? In other contexts too, for example, safety, we want to make sure that we're quantifying the idea of driver behavior through data. And then going back to the North Star, what are the most leading indicators of collisions, potential collisions? Because in the safety world, the North Star is how do we reduce the number of collisions that happen on the road? So we look at things like harsh braking, acceleration, cornering. Are you speeding? Do you have a seatbelt on? And then going beyond that, it's this idea of environmental factors too, because driving during the day, clear skies is very different than driving at night in the middle of a blizzard, right?
Abby, our audience is probably wondering, how does Geotab grab all this data? Can you give us just a little 30-second overview of how, I know it may be changing as we speak, but currently the Go9 device that is attached to a vehicle or a tractor, how it's able to grab this information?
For sure. So when you plug the Go device into the OBD2 port, we collect the data through the Geotab curve algorithm. So essentially what that does is we're looking at data points that are coming in and capturing those data points that have the most information among them. So for example, if you're driving down an interstate at 60 miles an hour pretty consistently, not really too much happens in that time. But if you're in stop and go traffic, there's a lot that'll happen in that little bit. So what we're looking to do is capture those data points with the most information in it. And if we ever need to increase the resolution, we can interpolate between them as well. This makes sure that we're capturing all of those major things that are happening on the road. For example, if something is captured at a time-based, in a time-based format, typically, you may miss something if an event happens in those couple of seconds where data is not being transmitted. So for us, it's how do we get the most clear picture of what's happening on the road?
That's awesome. And for a fleet manager or a maintenance manager listening right now, what's the first step to shifting towards a predictive model? Is it a massive operational overhaul, or are there smaller, more manageable steps that they can take?
The first step is to just start with the data. At Geotab, our motto here is you can't manage what you don't measure. And starting with the data is exactly how you start to measure that. So telematics in your vehicle is a great way to start seeing this data. Like we just talked about the Go device, but many fleets listening already probably have telematics in their vehicles today. It's pretty table stakes across the industry. Where I'd recommend starting is with one or two things, typically things that are high frequency, but also high cost when you think about scale. These are the types of problems that can typically be turned into quick but big wins, like the battery example we just talked about. DPF is another one that's pretty common that data can help you address very quickly. And then once you have the data, that gives you the ability to move from reactive, fixing it when it breaks, to analyzing that data and insights to fixing it before it breaks. And usually, a good telematics partner will typically have these predictive models already in place for you with actionable insights for your fleet. Something that I always like to look at is potentially running those models on past data and compare it to what already happened, just to further validate how powerful the models are.
Are there some reports inside the Geotab user interface that helps predict what might be coming up as far as failure points?
Yeah, absolutely. So the diagnostic that I mentioned, electrical systems rating, is a combination of a few different things, looking at the voltage curve, looking at vehicle use as well to identify across a vehicle's lifespan. How do you set up this diagnostic with a simple rule, right? How do you get flagged when a vehicle is at risk of having an electrical issue? And actually, the power of the rules infrastructure that we have, rather than having to download a report, it'll flag you immediately and tell you, hey, this vehicle is probably something you need to look at. So we're trying to not just provide the ability to, download reports and look through them, but we're in the business of surfacing those actionable insights so that our fleet managers aren't spending time digging through reports, crunching all these numbers. Rather, they have a specific action that they can take.
Abby, you mentioned at the top of the podcast that you're a storyteller. So could you walk us through a real world scenario? Give us an example of a specific failure that was caught by a predictive model and the downtime event that may have been avoided as a result. Does that happen often?
I'll give you two. For a personal story, as geotabbers like to dog food our own products. So I have a Go device in my car. And funny enough, a couple of years ago, actually, the device caught my car's battery voltage way below the normal levels for, a regular Corolla, right? So when I had that, I took it to the dealership and I told them, hey, I have a diagnostic that tells me my battery needs to be replaced. So because of the Go device in my car, I was actually able to save a few $100 from not needing the tow or the diagnostic check. All I needed to do was just replace the battery. At the fleet story, now applying all of this at scale, one of our largest customers, their main issue was a ton of electrical no starts, and a lot of it was typically needing to do battery replacements. So they had two potential solutions they were looking at the time. Do they look into more operational solutions, such as training, instituting a new tool, process improvements, versus a CapEx investment, such as installing solar panels? So what they did was they worked with us to implement our electrical systems rating diagnostic and actually worked with us to refine the model and the processes around using it. The result of that was a 95% accuracy in battery failure predictions, and overall led to about a 30% reduction in on-road breakdowns and battery replacements. So all this to say that these strong maintenance processes, introducing these new tools, really help to limit the false positive risk, making sure you're actually catching those issues with high confidence. And then that CapEx that they were looking at initially could be reinvested elsewhere that could bring out more value.
Abby, I know you can't mention probably customer names, but could you give us an idea of how many total vehicles that customer you just mentioned in the fleet story has on the air?
For sure, this is a large food and beverage company with a fleet of well over 10,000 vehicles. So you can imagine solving this issue, which you may think of it's a fairly easy win. Applied at scale, resulted in tremendous savings and also tremendous efficiency gains for this fleet.
Yeah, a lot of dollars to the bottom line for sure, and that's the impact that customers are looking for. Make the fleet safer and more cost effective. Well, let's move on here. This has been great so far. What do you see as the single biggest barrier to AI adoption for small to mid-sized fleets? Because a lot of people think, oh, a large fleet has all the resources, the people, the technology in place, but small to medium-sized fleets, a lot of times the fleet managers wearing multiple hats. They may also run the maintenance department and be responsible for safety.
That's a great question, and you bring up a great point, right? Fleet managers are extremely busy people, especially as the fleet's smaller. Without some of those resources, really the fleet's goals should be to work with a telematics provider who doesn't just provide data, but insights. Because really, I find that across all of my conversations, the biggest barrier seems to be change management and a fear of the complexity of AI. So, what we need to really do is emphasize that the adoption of it really isn't that complex. And instead, it's working with a partner who's able to activate on a lot of these things. For example, instead of hundreds of diagnostics being fired, you get a few immediately actionable insights, like replace these 5 vehicles batteries at their next possible service, or immediately take this vehicle off the road, right? So we want to be able to provide that level of easy actionable information while abstracting away the complexity of what goes on underneath the hood, because the fleet manager doesn't care about that. They just want to know, what do I need to do with my vehicles?
Well, a lot of folks that have heard about AI think of Chat GPT, and I've used Chat GPT. You plug it in. Is it always 100% accurate? No, it's not. So I guess my next question is, AI is known to be dependent on the quality of the data. How can fleet managers ensure that the data they're collecting is clean and accurate enough for AI to be effective? And what are the real world risks of making critical decisions based on any flawed data?
Stop me if you've heard this one before, but as the saying goes, garbage in, garbage out. So high quality data will come from a high quality, properly installed device in your vehicles. So, for example, we talked about the curve algorithm earlier, capturing those data points. Really, it depends on the telematics provider as well to clean that data and transform it into those usable, actionable insights. Making decisions based on flawed or even bad data is sometimes worse than making decisions with no data. For example, if you get a notification to ground a perfectly healthy truck because of a false positive, you lose a valuable day of revenue. Or vice versa, if you leave a truck on the road because of a missed, very real issue, it could lead to an unplanned breakdown and tons of expenses around that, like the tow and additional days of downtime. Bad data and therefore bad information will lead to reduced trust. And that's, you're negating the whole point of investing in this capability.
You mentioned curve algorithm a couple times now, and that is a specific to the Geotab platform. Can you give us a high level overview of what the curve algorithm is?
For sure. So the curve algorithm, in the easiest explanation, is a compression algorithm. For example, if we're looking at a time where you're driving straight along a road for, we'll call it an hour, but you take a couple windy turns in the road and then continue going straight, what the curve algorithm will do is capture the first point where you're driving at a consistent speed up until that speed slows down, or you get an acceleration reading because of that windy roads that are coming up. It'll capture those data points along the windy road because of all of those changes that are happening. And then continuing on straight, it'll capture meaningful data points. A great example here is a collision, for example. Within a collision, there's so much that happens within the span of 5-10 seconds, where if you're going with the traditional time-based way of collecting data, sometimes you may miss a lot of important things during that window of time data is not being transmitted. But the curve algorithm, on the other hand, will capture all of those fine details. And actually, that's a big part of some of our safety tools that we have today for predictive safety as well.
Well, AI is, my news feed is flooded with AI information, big data centers being built, the power needs to fuel these data centers as well, the fear of being replaced by AI if you're not
Mhm.
familiar in using AI. But as AI gets smarter at optimizing routes, predicting maintenance, and coaching drivers, what does the role of the human fleet manager or dispatcher evolve into? And, how do they work alongside AI to become more strategic rather than fearing being replaced by AI?
I really want to emphasize that AI is not meant to replace the fleet manager or dispatcher. It is really supposed to make them more effective and give them more time back to be strategic. The power of AI is that it automates a lot of that manual work of analysis, of digging through hundreds of reports, spending hours crunching numbers. That all will be done within the span of minutes with the power of AI, right? And you're deriving those clean insights from that data. The AI can really answer the what and the when, so giving the human in the loop the ability to focus on the why. So if I'm the AI and I'm suggesting an optimal route or a vehicle that could fail, the fleet manager then has the ability to say, oh, that driver actually needs to get home for a kid's birthday and they can't do that route. Or the real cost of pulling that vehicle off road means I'm losing $10,000 to $20,000 a day in revenue, as opposed to maybe the $1,000 I'd pay for the tow and get it fixed. So what that really amounts to is AI allowing for more strategic thinking and action for the human, really not obsolescence.
Greetings, tech-savvy truckers. If you're steering a trucking venture and craving a front row seat to the latest transportation tech, look no further than our sponsor, Add-on Systems. Picture this. You're on the open road, tackling unpredictable conditions, and need technology matching your business goals. Add-on Systems gets the pulse of the trucking industry and delivers the solutions you've been looking for. Whether you're orchestrating operations, championing safety, or calling the shots as the owner, Add-on Systems brings you cutting-edge trucking tech, from driver mobile apps to risk solutions and telematics that supercharge efficiency, elevate safety standards, and give your profits a welcome boost. Think software applications putting vital info at your fingertips, advanced telematics, and a freshly designed risk platform from listening to customers for over 30 years. What makes Add-on Systems stand out? Their unwavering commitment to customization. They get that every trucker's needs are as unique as their routes, and their modular approach lets you fine-tune your tech arsenal to match your specific business requirements. Many of Add-on's customers have been with them for decades because they know trucking software and will treat you like family. Ready to turbocharge your trucking journey? Cruise over to addonsystems.com, take action today, and elevate your trucking game with Add-on Systems by visiting the information in the podcast show notes to set up a chat with a trusted advisor or give them a call. Thanks to our friends at Add-on Systems for driving the Trucker Tech podcast forward. Now, back to the show.
This switch to some other telematics that are available in the tractor, there's been a big movement towards cameras. And I think I read a statistic recently that 20% of fleets do have some type of camera, whether it's forward facing only or forward and driver facing. So there's a lot of upside. About 80% of the vehicles do not have cameras, and due to, especially here in Texas, nuclear verdicts, has really been an issue as far as insurance and companies having to pay millions of dollars out of pocket. So what makes today's AI smart cameras so different than from a simple recording device that perhaps came out 10, 15 years ago?
That's a great question. The main difference, going back to the theme of our conversation today, is reactive versus proactive. So the traditional dash cam, you typically review that after an accident happens. Yay, I've got evidence. I can prove that the thing that happened. The AI smart camera focuses on the proactive side of things. There's a built-in computer that actually is able to see what's happening in real time and catch those high-risk events as they happen. For example, it's seeing me go for my phone. It sees me not wearing a seatbelt. It has the ability to provide that instant information either to the driver directly or to the fleet manager to have that conversation.
There's over 20, we won't get into it today, but the Geotab marketplace has many telematics solution partners as well as software partners. And I believe last I checked, there's over 20 camera providers that have been vetted and work closely with the Geotab user interface. But a new recent announcement, it came out about a year or so ago at the Geotab Connect conference, is the Go Focus camera. And now recently, just in September of 2025, the Go Focus Plus camera. Can you give us a high-level overview of those two new products that Geotab is offering?
Absolutely. So the Go Focus is the lower level where we're really capturing some of those key signals that can help us with, for example, exonerating a driver, being able to catch some of those ADAS signals as we get them. Whereas the Go Focus Plus is where now we get into this world of the AI smart camera, the ability to, capture some of these things because we have models running on the edge, which means, running on the device itself. So the AI itself, for example, on the Go Focus Plus has that ability to capture some of these things that we just talked about, like seeing if a driver is not wearing their seatbelt or distracted in any way. So really it gives fleets two different ways to be able to take advantage of the AI insights, but really for where their fleet is, it needs it today. For example, you don't really need to start with, the rocket launcher if you're just learning how to use this thing, right? Crawl, walk, run is a big thing that we believe in, and really providing the right solution for where a fleet needs it. If they're just starting out, the Go Focus, or if they're an already pretty advanced fleet, we can get them set up with the Go Focus Plus.
Drivers spend a tremendous amount of time in their vehicle, especially if they're an over-the-road truck driver. They spend days, if not weeks, living in their tractor, which is challenging. I salute the professional drivers out there. If you're tuned in today, thank you so much. But I was involved with some camera technology about a decade ago, some early technology. It made a tremendous amount of sense from a risk management perspective, and company ownership really bought into the impact it could have on improving safety. However, the drivers weren't buying in at least 10 years ago, and there's still some pushback. But how can fleets implement this technology in a way that leads to driver buy-in? What have you found out there from talking to some of your customers?
This is entirely a situation for transparency and communication, really making sure that you're as open as possible, because the driver is such a cornerstone of the fleet industry today. Nothing would get done in our supply chain world if it wasn't for the drivers out there getting where they need to safely and on time. So for us, really, it's about how do we frame it around the benefit to the driver, right? Cameras are absolutely not supposed to be a gotcha tool. It is supposed to be a protect them tool, especially in cases when you can use it for exoneration. We're big believers in the idea of positive reinforcement, right? So recognize those safe drivers. If there's a risky incident that happens, use that as evidence to train for the whole fleet to not single out an individual driver. And then also very core to our ethos is this idea of privacy, right? So fleet managers are not spending hours reviewing video footage, right? We said earlier, they don't have the time to do that. These AI cameras are meant to catch those specific high risk moments for the fleet manager to act on and coach. And again, do it in a way that's celebrating safety and celebrating the good behaviors.
I've talked to many fleets that have used camera solutions, and you mentioned exoneration. That's a great benefit to the professional driver. If the driver is not at fault, they can settle that case or send that video to the state trooper or the court system and get that thrown out right away. And on the flip side is if the fleet knows they were at fault, they can work closely to settle that case quickly and not let it drag on for years and years. Has that been some of your experience as well?
Exactly. Almost always, we go back to that ability of you can't manage what you don't measure, right? And with this, the data is supremely important to back up what has happened potentially on the road. There have absolutely been cases where the Geotab data has been able to exonerate drivers, specifically proving that what the person who was making the complaint had said didn't actually happen, because we could either, one, prove the driver wasn't there at that time, or have the lead up behavior to that analyzed and show no, the driver was acting perfectly safe. The camera footage shows that this whomever else had cut in front of the driver. Lots of situations like that where the data has been able to come and act on behalf of the driver.
Well, there's a tremendous amount of data flowing in, not only from cameras, but the ELD device, the telematics device, and there's so many other pieces of technology coming in, tablets inside the cab as well, wireless cellular connections, and on and on. But fleet managers, they're collecting so much data and sensitive data about their vehicles, drivers, and even customers. What should they be asking their telematics provider about how their data is being secured and protected from cyber threats?
This is a supremely important topic in the fleet world. Important questions to ask your telematic providers would be, for example, is my data encrypted? And it should be encrypted throughout that entire collection process, right from the vehicle to whatever transformation to wherever it's stored today. Another important question, for example, is what frequency is GPS or any other data point being collected at versus do they just support it? The frequency is a very important one, as we talked about the curve algorithm, for example, because then you're catching those meaningful, important data points. More important now, as the world of data and AI continues to evolve, is government regulations being put into place, privacy standards, certifications, things like that. Are telematics providers following those regulations? Do they have specific certifications like the SOC2, for example, to show that they've been audited by a recognized third party? Additionally, there's a lot of state level laws. For example, if you're in California, the CPRA is a regulation to follow against privacy. So are they compliant with those policies? And something that, we like to do as well is ethical hacking, we call it, where we're simulating attacks to try to find vulnerabilities across our ecosystem so that we can close them and prevent bad actors from taking advantage of it.
Well, a lot of key points there to take away, for sure. And data breaches. Amazon Web Services just recently had an outage. I have no idea what caused that, but we just rely on big data so much until there is an issue. So great points there, Abby. And next up, beyond security, there's the issue of data privacy. How does a company like Geotab ensure that fleet data is owned and controlled by the customer and not used in ways that haven't been authorized, like sharing across other networks or with other folks that are interested in all that data from those 5 million devices?
That's an awesome question. We are a privacy first company. Our core philosophy is that the customer, the fleet, is the one that owns the data. We may just process it and store it, but the customer is the one ultimately who gets the final say of how it's used, where it lives, and where it goes to. For us, try to make sure to keep it all secure and protected. We also have very robust anonymization and de-identification tools to make sure that no personally identifiable or any other sensitive information leaks or goes where it's not supposed to. Even within my Geotab, if you have a specific database or you're a specific single company, there are ways to set up permissions and clearances within the tool itself to make sure that there aren't people within your organizations that are seeing things that they're not supposed to. For us, we also have a large enterprise data office that has a privacy and security focused team that keeps us always compliant, that's always working to make sure that we're thinking about data governance the right way. And then we can also work with our fleets and our partners to make sure that they're also thinking about data governance the right way.
Well, we're getting into some real technical weeds here. And if you're a fleet owner, a vice president of operations, a fleet manager, safety manager, make sure you share this with your IT department because there's a lot of value bombs in this podcast today on the technical side. With fleets using multiple systems, like we talked about, ELDs, maintenance software, CRMs, and legacy TMS systems, what's the biggest challenge in getting all that data to communicate with each other?
The biggest challenge that I've seen by far, regardless of how big or small your organization is organizational silos. Having siloed teams within an organization, teams that don't talk to each other and work together, will inherently result in data silos as well, causing data to not talk to each other either. There's a great concept that I came across fairly early in my technical career called Conway's Law, which really says that organizations are setting up to design systems. They're constrained by how their communication structures are set up as well. So if you have a siloed communication structure across your organizations, your data is going to be siloed as well. The best way to break that down is to have those cross-functional teams and communication structures that will enable a system set to be effective to ensure data can talk to each other.
Yeah, over the years, I've seen, you mentioned data silos, but especially larger organizations creating these spreadsheets and these pivot tables and having to share all this siloed data on third party applications, which can be challenging in its own right.
One of the things I also wanted to quickly touch on here is, a great example is in a lot of fleets that I've seen, fleet information is owned by the operational teams, but everything technical is owned by the IT team, right? So just having those two teams talk to each other, share objectives, have a cross-functional strategy on how to activate on this data, store this data, and use it will already lead to incredibly effective outcomes.
Here at Add-on Systems, we use APIs very often to bring in information from various telematics partners and other systems to communicate, like you mentioned, to eliminate some of those data silos. But how does Geotab approach open API integration so fleets can create a unified data ecosystems without ripping and replacing existing technology?
That's one of my favorite things about Geotab is the fact that we are an open source first platform. So anything you see within the My Geotab suite will have an API endpoint that you can use to access it outside of the platform. That extends to simple diagnostics or individual data points, right to our AI offerings, which we'll talk about a little bit later as well. Because for us, it's how do we give developers the keys to build their own integrations and custom applications on top of the platform we offer today. There's actually a group within Geotab itself as well, the integration consultants, whose sole purpose is to white glove support and guide anyone looking to leverage our SDK. So really getting you to understand what is the most effective way to use our APIs to accomplish the thing that you want to accomplish. And you say yourself, the Geotab marketplace is a phenomenal example of seeing how all of these hundreds of custom integrations are already built that just plug right into the Geotab ecosystem. So as much as possible, we try to make it easy for fleets, partners, anybody who wants to build on top of our platform to do so with as little effort and complexity as possible.
We've mentioned a lot of acronyms on this podcast today. Can you share with the audience, maybe the non-technical folks, what an SDK is?
Sure. So SDK stands for Software Development Kit. Think about it as one giant library with each and every single API, which is called an application program interface. Essentially what that is each and every thing that allows you to grab a specific item outside of my Geotab. So think about the SDK as a library of each individual item that you have a direct line to be able to pull it outside of Geotab.
That's awesome. Thanks for that explanation. That even helped me. I was familiar with the acronym, but didn't know all the details behind it. Can you share an example of a fleet that's connected multiple data systems through the Geotab platform, and what business outcomes resulted from that integration, the impact?
That's a great question. And actually, you'll be familiar with my answer because you had him on a guest on this podcast a little while ago.
Sure.
Our friend Tom Wolfenden over at Laser Logistics is an example, excellent example of a leader who's done this at his organization, who's connected these data points, broken down these silos at his organization and seen the benefits. He developed medallion architecture. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that, that's the idea of different layers of your data as far as cleanliness and usability. So the bronze layer, as an example, is your most raw, direct from the source. Your silver layer is a level of cleanliness that's used in different business operations. And the gold layer, nobody argues with. That is the reporting standard data. Nobody argues about, is this correct, is this not? Everyone is aligned and is now, how do we use this information to turn data into action? This resulted in a lot of reduced operational expenses for them, as well as, there's an increased revenue potential from those additional opportunities through connecting all of this data.
Yeah, Tom was a great guest, and maybe we'll put in the show notes here on this podcast how to get to that episode. He's done a lot of great things through the SDKs and APIs as well. Back to AI, how are AI-driven insights changing the way fleets coach drivers beyond the traditional safety scorecards?
So with this, as I briefly touched on earlier, this idea of AI-powered cameras, especially now that we're seeing technology improve at a ridiculously fast rate, the AI itself is running on the device, right? So no longer now is it sending data to somewhere else to run the AI and then send it back. Now the capabilities are there to provide that instant in-cab insight. For example, if I'm tailgating, the camera would be able to recognize that my following distance is not really that safe, and it'll tell me, hey, you should probably increase your following distance. And then this will also ping the fleet manager to get notified of these high-risk events within minutes, right? So the ability to check in on the driver immediately or at the end of the day while the events are top of mind, right? So the idea of reviewing these end-of-week reports while it's still in practice, now this changes the game for the coaching effectiveness because you're able to get these insights that much quicker. One more thing I wanted to touch on was benchmarking, which is a very powerful tool that customers can use today to compare fleets and drivers against similar fleets in the ecosystem. So for example, if we're looking at the idea of benchmarking peer groups, we're looking at key characteristics of fleets. For example, how many vehicles are in the fleet? What types of vehicles are in the fleet? Where do they drive typically? And then most importantly for me, how are these vehicles driven? What's the behavior of these vehicles? Their vocation, we call it, or duty cycle. This gives a way for fleets not only to compare against themselves, but also where they are against like fleets for that additional opportunity to improve their outcomes. So an example I like to show is, a fleet may be down 5% in their idling compared to last year. That's great. But that benchmarking view now will tell you, hey, you're actually 8% behind compared to the average of the peer group that you're in, and potentially behind by 15% when you're looking at that top 20%. So you always have that ability to strive for better.
Is that the power of the 5 million devices as far as benchmarking against other peer groups? You're able to take data from other like fleets and compare to a customer's fleet?
Exactly right. And then for us too, going back to what I had mentioned about anonymization, aggregating, de-identification, we're making sure that only fleets are able to see data that's related to themselves in that wider context, so that you may not exactly know, who your competitors are, but if you're a specific kind of fleet, you'll have a pretty good idea, right? That's how we're able to get very specific. And then also something else that the benchmarking across the 5 million vehicles provides is there may be fleets in a very different industry, but they look very similar and they operate very similar. So that gives us a much larger sample size for us to be able to compare against, to be confident in the insights that we're giving you.
That's awesome. And based on all that data, what trends are you seeing in driver behavior analytics that correlate most strongly with reduced accidents or perhaps improved fuel economy?
On the reduced accident sides, for us, aggressive driving we've seen is a very large indicator of potential accidents. Harsh braking, acceleration, cornering, tailgating, those kinds of behaviors. Fleets that typically use these AI powered insights, be it benchmarking or cameras or combinations of all of these, to coach these behaviors will typically see the quickest improvement in their safety. Additionally, what we've seen some of our greatest successes for fleets that are trying to improve their safety. Implementing data-driven safety policies that are regularly reviewed against the insights will provide that longer-term sustained success. For the fuel economy side of things, really what we're seeing is harsh driving and excessive idling as big indicators of putting increased strain on the vehicle and in the engine. With your stop and go driving, you're letting the engine run too long. Those are some of the biggest causes of fuel consumption, right? So if you're coaching a driver to drive more consistently, so example, you're not weaving through traffic, but you're keeping that consistent speed, you're shutting off the engine for a little bit longer when you're parked, if it makes sense for your duty cycle, that alone can result in thousands of dollars of fuel saved per vehicle per year.
Having all that data and the reporting capabilities and the customization of reporting inside Geotab really provides powerful tools on making those driver behavior changes to impact the bottom line. And like I said, fuel is one of the largest expenses in any fleet organization, and reducing that just a few percentage points can mean the difference between a profit and a loss for a month or a quarter. That's great insight, Abby. Hey, next up, how can data-driven coaching be positioned positively to improve driver morale and retention instead of feeling punitive? I know a lot of drivers, a lot of times when they get confronted by their fleet managers, a lot of times it's a negative situation. So how can they flip that into a positive interaction?
It really goes back to that concept of culture and transparency throughout the organization, right? This shouldn't be a stick, it should be a carrot. And for us, this idea of positive reinforcement, some examples that we've seen are, fleets that'll publicly recognize their top 5 to 10 safest drivers weekly. There is an example of maybe you might gamify it, right, to drive some of that healthy competition, even with prizes. So Geotab Vitality is an excellent example of that, where we're trying to use the idea of behavioral economics to say, hey, you're doing really great. Here's $10 for a Starbucks coffee. Or, if you're doing consistently great, let's give you an even bigger reward. There's actually one customer that shared with us that they have a WWE styled safety belt that's given to the safest driver every week that people actively compete for. So it's really this idea of, how data is being used for good, right? We're using the data to inquire, not accuse. And the most effective outcomes we've seen is when fleets will have those two-way conversations with their drivers, not focused on the behavior itself, but why behind the behavior, so that can work and have those human conversations on how they can help improve it.
That's a lot of fun, having a wrestling belt. There was a famous wrestler named Roddy Piper. So
Mhm.
I would always reference that since my last name is Piper, and he was one of my favorite wrestlers. I wasn't a huge fan, but he was one of the best of all the best for sure. Well, hey, let's talk a little bit about the future. The future is coming at us fast and furious, especially with all the AI tools we've mentioned earlier here in the podcast. But over the next 3 to 5 years, what's one emerging technology or trend that you're most excited about that could reshape fleet operations over that time period?
Oh, I'm so excited you asked. For me, it's generative AI and agentic AI. So that is the world we live in today. So, for example, traditional AI is meant to predict. It's meant to take in data points and predict something based on that data point. Whereas generative AI is all about creating something new. Uh, Agentic AI takes that one step forward and it takes action on some of those AI powered insights as well. And we're already seeing this with Geotab Ace, which is our generative AI offering, where now what you can do is instead of crunching through all those reports, you can actually just ask natural language questions of your data. So, for example, which of my vehicles in Dallas have batteries that are most likely to fail? Or which of my drivers have had the fewest harsh driving events in the last week, right? Going back to that idea of let's celebrate the wins. Really, this idea now of how do we reduce the time to insight as much as possible to give fleet managers all that time back to be strategic and make decisions.
That's amazing how quickly AI has been put into place at Geotab and other organizations that makes it simple for those fleet managers to put in that language model and get results quickly. How do you see AI evolving from being reactive and predictive to becoming truly autonomous in decision making for fleets, like I just mentioned?
So agentic really is the next step. So traditional AI predicts, it'll tell you that something is about to happen for you to make the action on. The generative side of things will let you get those immediate quick insights to know where should I focus my energy. But then agentic, for example, is now taking the answers to those questions and actually acting on it. For example, it's going to create a work order for a high risk maintenance issue while you're asleep. So for the next morning, there's already a technician that's able to take that vehicle into the shop and work on it. Or, for example, if there's a driver that had a couple back-to-back risky events, it'll immediately set up that coaching event for you to be able to action. When we look at this idea of moving from reactive to predictive, the next step really is prescriptive. So now what can we tell you to do rather than, hey, this thing had already happened, to, hey, this thing is going to happen, to now this is what you need to do to ensure that thing doesn't happen. And now we're seeing AI evolve on the order of days now, as opposed to months. Things are happening so fast, and now we're at a point where AI is being empowered to make these decisions, right? So giving AI that agency, which is where agentic AI really comes from. So if you think about what the not too distant future looks like, you'll have an autonomous dispatch system for an EV fleet that'll reroute an EV to a charging station if it has low battery, right? It'll look at what is the best one in terms of price, how long it'll take to charge, but also how long does the driver have remaining on their hours of service. And that's all with no human intervention, allowing you, the fleet manager, to say, actually, no, I think this driver actually should go to this one because of all these other situations that may be going on. So really what we want to do now is provide the humans with the most relevant information for them through specialized agents, for example, a maintenance agent or a safety agent or a coaching agent, each with a very specific purpose that takes away a lot of that mental load from the human to be more decision focused.
Well, this is exactly why we created the Trucker Tech podcast, to bring information directly to the end users. And this has been a phenomenal segment here on Trucker Tech, probably one of the best as far as a deep dive into technology. And I really just have one last question for you, Abby. This has been phenomenal. But for fleet managers listening today, what's the one mindset or capability they should start developing now to stay ahead of where this technology is going? Maybe one or two key takeaways.
Great way to wrap this up. And, before that, again, I wanted to say, John, thanks for having me. This has been a fantastic conversation. And, I'm looking forward to seeing where all of this stuff can be taken in the future. For the fleet managers that are listening today, my biggest takeaway is that being data driven is really a culture and a mindset shift. And you don't have to be a leader in the organization. It can be at any level, from an individual contributor to the chief technology or chief executive officer. You don't need to be a data scientist or tech whiz who has to be coding all hours of the day to be a data-driven leader. It all comes down to learning how to ask questions and prompt the AI models, being one of the most important skills of today. So how do you ask those right questions to get the answers that you're looking for. Really, the fleet manager of the future is a coach and strategist who is enabled by the AI to make more effective decisions. So my challenge to all fleet professionals listening today is to try to make one small change or one small action at least once a week through a data-driven insight as a starting point, because you'll be very surprised at how small actions can quickly add up to some pretty incredible outcomes.
Well, thanks everyone for tuning in today. Make sure you share this episode. It's just a wealth of information and knowledge. As you can tell, Abby is a phenomenal technologist and really passionate about all things there at Geotab and for our industry. And make sure you subscribe. For Abby, Narayanan, this is John Piper. That'll do it for another segment of Trucker Tech. Thank you so much, Abby, for taking the time out of your busy schedule.
Thanks for having me, John. And last thing I'd like to say is go Blue Jays.